There's a lot going on here, even with some of the teams that are literally out of the playoff.
What kind of team do you want? And I think, to me, that's how you measure the success of the organization.
They've found some big plays now. They're getting the ball downfield.
Really exciting game. Two teams that can move the ball, it seems like, at will.
Welcome to Coach. I'm Patricia. I'm joined by Michael Lombardi and Coach Bill Belichick. And we're going to talk about something a little bit different this week. While a lot of teams in the league are trying to push and get ready for the playoffs, we're actually going to talk about some of the teams that aren't in the playoffs, maybe mathematically eliminated, have had some changes within their organizations, but really starting to look towards next year. They've got to get in and talk about some roster, some maybe salary cap situations. We're going to go right down the AFC. We're going to talk about the Browns, the Jaguars, the Jets, the Titans, the Patriots, the Raiders, and then we'll flip over to the NFC and talk about the Bears, the Panthers, and the Giants.
And a couple of these teams haven't been mathematically eliminated, but we're going to go ahead and just put them into this category and talk about what they need to do. But just in general, Mike, what would you do now as the general manager of a team that's been eliminated from the playoffs and you're looking ahead to next year, whether you are or aren't in a coaching search? Take that out of it for a minute. But how would you prepare for next season with still a month to go in the season?
I think the most important thing is to try to see what players you can count on for next year and categorize the player. This guy's part of our future. That's A. This guy we're not sure of. That would be in B. And then C, this guy isn't really part of our future. See if we can replace him from somebody else's practice squad. I think everything has to be geared towards trying to win the game, but also, more importantly, trying to prove the team and prove some of the young players to kind of get a sense of what we need to correct and start working on your team needs. Like, we're going to build the team needs. We're going to need this. We're going to need this position. See if we can fill from within as opposed to always trying to go outside. So this is really about player development right now. It's about trying to play the games and develop some young talent.
And it's still not out of the question to be able to get a player now that would be on your roster next year.
Absolutely. And look at all the players on the practice squad. You could offer money, guarantee them, put some signing bonus into it. If you feel like the player's worth a fifth-round pick, let's say, for example, and you feel like he could be part of your team next year, kicking game, morphing into a potential starting position, you got to try to take that guy and develop him because you want to find out about the player. You want to know who you can count on. I think that's really important. And then you've got to be able to, through the head coach, is make sure everybody understands the last month of the season isn't a vacation. It's really, we're driving ourselves towards next year.
Well, there's some players that will be playing for contracts, really, to either be re-signed by their team or somebody else. But I thought there was always an opportunity. We always had to be careful of this, too. When you're a playoff team and you have a guy coming back off IR or wherever he's coming from, and you have to make room for him, you know, inevitably, you've got to drop somebody off your roster because you generally don't want to put those players on injured reserve because you might need them down the stretch, too. So if you can, you try to get them on the practice squad or find some other way to manipulate it. But I think the teams that are working at the bottom here have an opportunity to maybe take somebody off a good team that they have to release in order to bring back a player who's a key contributor for them.
Yeah, some of those playoff teams certainly are going to have to recruit some of those guys to stay with you. And, you know, it's tough if you're a player in that situation. You're like, hey, I'm going to stay, work, try to improve. Maybe there's a place for me next year on this team. But, you know, some of those other teams come calling and they're saying, hey, you can get a couple game checks and you can go out and, you know, have a position and the roster looks better. It's hard to compete with that sometimes.
Not only the game checks, but those 3 games get you a vested year. And so for a lot of players, that vested year is important in their career. So there's a lot going on here, even with some of the teams that are literally out of the playoffs, but they're still working to go towards next year. And so as we break them down one by one, we'll talk about what each team could be doing and how they can help themselves going forward.
Yeah, I think the effort by the players is critical because the one thing going here is we know the eye in the sky. We tape all these games, and they get watched quite a bit. And you got to make sure the players know that everybody's watching. It's what does a player do when there's no chance of winning that matters more than when everything's going great.
Yeah, and I think if the coaching staff gives up, the players will certainly give up. If the coaching staff is still in there fighting, then the players will join in the fight too, even though they're in the end, the record's not going to make any difference. But there's a lot of pride and effort into it. So I think leadership at the top with some of the programs who don't have a good record is still really important. And you can see some of the true leaders in the league step up, even though the record doesn't reflect it.
Yeah, so many great things to talk about. Let's get started.
Back to throw. Look, a lot of pressure. They got it.
Trying to set up a screen, and it's intercepted.
But Hines Allen buries Levis, and the ball comes out.
And it's partially blocked. Oh, boy. What a deflating feeling this has to be for this team.
Called a fumble on Caleb Williams, and the 49ers take the ball.
Well, we'll start off in the AFC and start breaking down some of the teams here and really go right into the Cleveland Browns. I think this is a team that, if you look at last year, they did a heck of a job really competing, putting themselves in a position where, things were on the upswing statistically, offense, defense, working together. And then this year, obviously, just a disappointing year for them. But they've got a lot of things to look at. I think as you look towards next year, certainly the quarterback position will be a long conversation that they have in that building. And then also just the general salary cap structure right now, where they are over the cap, trying to make space for next year so that they can add some pieces to get this team going forward.
Yeah, I think to me, the one thing you want with a bad year is to find answers, right? And I think ultimately, forget how much they paid Deshaun Watson. You have to put that out of there. They replaced him 2 years ago with Joe Flacco, and he led them to the playoffs. This year, they replaced him with Jameis Winston because of another injury, and all of a sudden, they had life with their offense. So you can change offensive coordinators, you can change offensive line, you can do all that stuff.
Which they did.
And proven that Watson's been the problem. So they're going to have that come to Jesus conversation with themselves and put away the money and then discuss, look, who is our quarterback of the future? Because we've tried with Deshaun Watson, we've paid him. Let's admit we made a mistake.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what they have to do is determine the direction of the program. Is it with Watson, which is a huge investment, or is it not, as you said, which in the last couple of years they've had arguably more success without him than they had with him. Last year in 2023, Cleveland was the best defensive team in the league. That slipped down a little bit, but still the strength of their team. It's really the other side of the ball, and they have some salary issues that they're going to have to talk about and address. They've really got I'd say they're a major fork in the road organizationally as to which way they're going to go with their quarterback, with their offense, with their offensive system.
Yeah, it's 17 guys on IR this year, so certainly that's always difficult, when you're trying to be consistent week in, week out with your roster. And then really as you're looking towards next year, they're going to have some contracts that are expiring, and the big one will be to the point we're talking about with the quarterback position, Winston. How do they, bring him back, or what do they decide to do there? Chubb will be another one. And then really, Wills. That's another really key piece to their offense that they're going to have to try to figure out how to handle that going into next year. And, to the point of the defense, they have one of the best defensive players in the league. So certainly I know they want to do as much as they can to build a strong team around, Myles Garrett, because he is such a dynamic player.
From a general manager's perspective, when you have 17 guys on IR, you got to really take a hard look at your performance, right?
Yep.
What are we doing training the players? That's way too many guys. That's abnormal. We're going to have the bumps and bruises. We get that. We're going to have ACLs. We can't control that. But 17 guys on IR, we got to take a deep look into what we're doing in terms of our performance element of our organization. Because as we saw what Philadelphia was able to do, correcting that problem last year to where they are this year in terms of conditioning, they solved it, and I think that's something Cleveland has to take a hard look at.
Yeah, I think really that's a great point to this whole conversation is a team like Philadelphia, how do they get better from where they were? Well, they've taken care of the conditioning aspect of it. That's a lot better. They're more consistent on offense. They're playing better defense. They got a running back who's helped them control the game. They've gotten a lot better, as Washington did. But so it just brings back to the point of, what does Cleveland do from here going forward? What direction do they want to go? And again, I think they're at a major crossroads.
Well, another team to talk about in the AFC is really the Jacksonville Jaguars. Where they are right now, their franchise quarterback is on IR, so they're going to have to, talk about the injury situation there as they go forward. But again, they have some cap space. They've got to improve their team. What do they do to help the quarterback next year? They've got to score some more points, offensively. But really, I think this is a team that's just got to improve overall.
In every area. I think the biggest mistake they can make is saying we need to improve the quarterback. You need to improve the team. Mm-hmm. Yes, the quarterback's got to be improved, certainly, and we call him a franchise player, but he's yet to play to that level.
No.
Not even close. And so I think he obviously has to, but the rest of the team has to improve. And I think they have to take a hard look at themselves. Shah Khan, the owner, said this is the most talented team he's had since he's been the owner in Jacksonville. This summer, that proved out to be not correct. And I think they have to be really honest and stop trying to sign receivers and try to get back to where they can control the game with their offensive and defensive lines. It wasn't long ago when Coughlin started with that franchise, he built both offensive and defensive lines, and that's why they won.
That's right. Another issue that Jacksonville is going to have to face the next 2 years is the stadium situation.
Yeah.
So they won't be playing in their stadium. They have to find another place to play. There's always a transitional aspect to that of training, traveling, no home field per se. It's just another I would say, not rock on the pile, but probably a boulder on the pile that has to be dealt with, that is the other 31 teams aren't talking about. And so when you look at the whole organization, the direction of the program, they're giving up too many points on defense. They haven't been productive on offense as what the expectations are. The stadium situation, again, there's a lot to unpack here. I don't think just this, if we get one guy, we're going to take care of everything. I don't think that's where they're at.
Well, look, that's always hard with the facility when that's changing too. But, even this past year, just the competitiveness of this team, they've talked about that through the course of the year. That's something I think that everyone's going to take a look at.
Yeah, when they played in London, head coach Doug Peterson said we got to change the culture, which he's ultimately been responsible for 3 years. So they've got decisions to make in terms of Shah Khan, the owner. Do they like this culture, or has Peterson changed it, or do they need a whole new culture and kind of remove everybody? Trent Baalke, the general manager, has been there since Urban Meyer was there. So I think there's a lot of tough questions they've got to answer down the road here.
Yeah, again, I don't think this is a one-man fix. This is going to have to be a kind of a little bit of a team maybe not rebuild, but certainly reform.
Yeah.
Staying in the South, another team really to talk about is the Tennessee Titans. They had a change last year with the coaching, staff. The head coach, Brian Callahan, comes in. He's trying to build that team up right now. The quarterback situation is something they're going to be talking about as they look forward to next year. And, they have some cap space. They've got to improve their team. It'll be a big offseason for this as a second-year head coach working with, Rand Carth on the GM there.
Yeah, unlike the other teams we've talked about so far, new coach, new general manager last year. Looks like that's the direction of the program.
Yeah, and the general manager likes Will Levis. He drafted him. And so after all these games, Levis missed games this year on being hurt with his shoulder. But is he good enough? I think they've seen enough of Levis. He's cut down on some of his stupid plays, but he still hasn't made enough good plays, right? And so I think that's really going to determine. They hired Brian Callahan to fix Will Levis. They brought in the Bengal offense to fix him. That really hasn't worked out. And this team has taken a giant step backwards from when Mike Vrabel was there to where they are now. They've got a ton of cap room, but I think it's all fundamentally going to come down to who is the quarterback of their future. Do they believe in Levis, or are they going to go in another direction? And if it's after 1 year, then why did you change from Vrabel? Right? Vrabel didn't believe in that situation was the right way to go.
Yeah, and Mike, had a strong running game with Derrick Henry, and, that also played into their defense. I mean, the Titans, in spite of their record, have one of the better defensive teams in the league. Not in a great division, but it's still one of the better defensive teams in the league. So I think that they feel like they can build from that defense. But clearly the offensive production and certainly the quarterback, those are big questions for them going forward.
Another team that's had 10 to 12 guys here on IR. A couple of the defensive guys that are leaders on that team have wound up on IR with Snead and Diggs. And then Cushenberry on the offensive side of the ball is kind of in the middle trying to help a young quarterback. Those are injuries that do impact your team. So I think trying to build that roster going forward to have that depth. It would be a big offseason for these guys. I think, again, new head coach working with the GM, trying to get on the same page with, getting ready for the draft, free agency. There's a lot of conversations they got to actually start now.
Yeah, and we've all been there before. The first year is always a little bit of a challenging year just to get everything organized, and you learn a lot about the team. You learn about your staff and everything else that goes into it. The second year is a year where you can make a jump because you can fix some of the things that you couldn't fix the first year. Those now kind of stick out like a sore thumb, and you can really address those. So this will be a big off season for the Titans to take. Maybe they didn't go forward this year, but maybe they have a better base to go forward from, and we'll see if they can catapult that into a better year in 25.
Yeah, and staying with really, new head coaches, new GMs, New England situation with Gerard Mayo as the head coach, Elliott Wolf in the GM role there. Think they found their quarterback that they like. What they do to try to support him, whether it's with skilled players or guys up front, however they try to, continue to build that offense. But I think there's just some questions here overall with this team and the roster, and what is that going to look like going forward with the philosophy of those two as they try to build the team?
Well, the two things I would be concerned about in New England is they can't block anybody up front. They really have a hard time controlling the game. Stevenson still fumbles way too much to really count on him to be the running back. May looks like he's got a great future, but they obviously need more skill around him. But it starts with the offensive line. And then defensively, they really have taken a huge step backwards this year. They're going to have to figure out what they want to become defensively, because last year in the categories they were very good. This year they haven't played to that level.
Yeah, they're in the bottom half of almost every defensive category. And so that's its own issue. And then the kicking's been inconsistent as well, both punting and kicking. So where May is or isn't is certainly a good guy to work with, but he's got a lot of work to do too. Again, we'll see what the direction of this program really, where that goes with Wolf, with Mayo, or maybe somebody else is part of this too. I don't know.
Yeah, and really a team that, a lot of their veteran leaders just kind of were knocked out to start the season, whether it was David Andrews, Bentley, Cole Strange, Barmore, they just kind of had some of those missing pieces. And you just never really saw that next level of, leadership or that next level of player step in and kind of take those roles. They really felt those injuries, I feel, this year, and it just kind of hurt the team overall.
But a couple of the players that they lost, Judon, who was a good leader, Mac Wilson, who's had a really good year for Arizona, a couple of those players would have definitely helped them. They elected to move on from them, have a lot of salary cap space next year. Maybe they'll be able to utilize that. But I think in some of the areas they stepped back on defensively, it's because they moved on from some players that are helping other teams.
Moving on from New England, another team that had some turnover last year, the Las Vegas Raiders, new head coach, first-time head coach, new GM, definitely some changes in that building. The quarterback position, I would say right now, is definitely going to be a conversation piece going into the offseason, not scoring enough points. There is some cap space with this team. I think it's top of the leagues or, right up there with anyone who has, room to spend. So they've got a lot of improvement that this team needs to make from a roster standpoint.
Yeah. Well, they've already made a major coaching change out there with the offensive staff, and then with the quarterback situation between Minshew and O'Connell, and where that is. Lost Jacobs, running game has suffered. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of direction they take, whether there are more staff changes or whether these are the staff changes they want to make. And then, again, kind of how this comes together offensively between the quarterback, the running game, no Adams, so they made a change at receiver. Like, kind of really, where is this going? I'm not sure that some of these players have been replaced. What's the future here?
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest concerns I have when watching the Raiders is they got worse on defense. They were supposed to improve defensively. They really, last year, after they fired Josh McDaniels, they really became a good defensive team, and they could run the football. So they had chances to win some games, and I think that momentum carried Pierce to becoming the head football coach in Las Vegas, but that hasn't carried over from one season to the next. Defensively, they've taken a step back, and they made the change to try to help their running game, and it has. Scott Turner has improved the running game. They just can't score any points. They haven't scored over 20 points in the last 4 weeks. So they're on this 9-game losing streak. And I think, to me, it really goes to how far can they get to. They're in a tough division. You got Andy Reid, you got Jim Harbaugh, Sean Payton.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a tough coaching challenge twice a year for Antonio Pierce. Yeah,
and two really good defensive players that you want to build around with Wilkins and Max Crosby. So there's pieces there that give you that toughness. But really, I just feel like we're missing the direction of the team. I think, the head coach, the GM, they've got to sit down and say, what kind of team do we want to be? What are we going to be going forward? There was some of that earlier in the year. Thought that got straightened out. That's kind of disappeared now. So what does that look like, and how do we build it?
That's always the conversation, the Raider way. Nobody ever tells you what the Raider way is, right? They just say the words, right? They don't know what the Raider way is, and the guy who invented the Raider way wants to have a size, speed team that can dominate in both offensive and defensive lines, and frankly, that's not what they have there.
Yeah, they're going to have to take a good look at that this offseason, because we all know that's what we expect to see in the silver and black every single week when they go out and they play.
They have a real challenge on their hands.
Yeah.
In say in the AFC East, you're chasing Buffalo.
Right.
Well, in the AFC West, they're chasing Denver, who's getting better.
Right.
Yeah.
The Chargers, who are getting better, and the Chiefs, who are arguably maybe the best team in the league.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're not just trying to catch one team, you're trying to really gain on everybody in the division. I think when you only have one team to look at, call it Buffalo in the AFC East, it's a lot easier to say, okay, well, how do we catch them? Where do we make our moves that bring us more on a par with the team that is the one we have to beat? Here, it's a little bit of everything. They have a lot of work to do.
They really do, and that's going to take a lot of strategy from the front office and from the head coaching staff to figure out how do we match up and how do we handle these teams, because they're all different, right? The one thing we do know about the teams in the AFC West, there's physicality and there's mental toughness. And if the Raiders don't match that, if they still want to smoke cigars in the locker room after a win and celebrate the wins more than really feel the losses, it's going to be hard.
Well, and there's a lot of coaching experience out there, too.
Right.
Between Andy and Sean, Jim Harbaugh, that's a lot of coaching experience, not just the head coaches, but their staffs.
Yep.
Look, these teams we talked about in the AFC, they can get an advantage if they approach it the right way. And I know there's more football to be played. All these teams are going to go compete. They're going to go try to win every single week. But there's just something that also has to take place while that's going on, whether it's the front office or working with the coach, the head coach, the staff, to take a look for next year so that you can get that advantage and try to improve your team and be more competitive next year. All right, well, look, it's time to turn our attention to the NFC. We're going to talk about a couple teams when we dive into this. Certainly the Bears, the Panthers, the Giants. And we left off one AFC team. While we're in New York, we're going to go over and we'll also talk about the Jets.
Welcome back to Coach. We did 5 teams in the AFC. We left the Jets off because we're going to talk about them here in the NFC, and we're going to combine them and make this a New York section here, along with Chicago and the Panthers, to talk about them as we move forward. But let's start on the Jets, okay? We know that they've already fired their head coach. We know they fired their general manager. So Woody Johnson has decided not to become the ambassador to some foreign country. He's going to stay in New York. He's going to be in Florham Park, and he's going to run the Jets. So there's nobody going to be having to get the job without going through Woody. So that's the first course of action. They got to hire a head coach. And then they have to address the Aaron Rodgers situation at quarterback.
Which is going to be a big decision. I feel like there's no doubt that Aaron Rodgers is going to play quarterback for somebody next year, whether it's with the Jets or somebody else. He's going to be in the league. So it's a question of what the Jets want to do with their financial commitment and the direction of the team. Is he the quarterback of the future? No. Can he help them win now? Maybe. And that's what they'll have to decide. Of course, they had a lot of other problems besides that, but the conversation's got to start at quarterback.
Yeah, the direction of the team is the biggest, I think, conversation they got to have in that building as they bring in a new regime, general manager, head coach. They made a move early in the year before they got rid of the head coach on the offensive side of the ball. That didn't really get things going. Obviously, the defense hasn't performed as well as it had in the past.
Well, actually, it's gotten worse since Coach Salah was released. The defense has gotten worse. So I'm not sure that move helped it.
Yeah, no question. And then I think, to me, when you break everything down, the age of the team, they signed a lot of older guys to kind of repair their season this year, whether it's Morgan Moses, Tyron Smith. Those guys, are they going to come back? And then you also got to factor in, how do they get the head coach and the general manager on the same page when they go out and do the hiring? That's going to be rather difficult. Look, I think at the end of the day, when we talk about New York, we're talking about problems internally within their building, because for all the years, let's talk 10 years here now, they haven't won. When you're losing this long, it's more than just the coach is bad. It's more than just the GM did a bad job picking the guy in the 4th round.
Absolutely.
Well, the other team in New York, the football Giants, have great historical presence, won Super Bowls, great ownership, all those things, but have faded away. I mean, this team this year is worse than the team that lost in the Miracle in the Meadowlands when Joe Pisarcik failed to hand the ball off to Larry Zonka, and we see Herm Edwards running in. I mean, this is how bad it's gotten. When you get out the old school shopping bags, the ones with the paper that we used to put over people's heads, when they come out, things are bad. And they were out last week against the Saints in the Meadowlands. So
were the banners with the plane.
And so were the banners. So John Mara, the owner of the Giants, has some really tough decisions, as does Woody Johnson with the Jets. I mean, this is going to be something. How do we fix this? Because we haven't been winning. We haven't been winning for so long.
As you said, it's a whole new direction. They've released Daniel Jones, so the quarterback position is obviously going to be a whole new conversation. And then really the direction and the foundation of the team and the leadership from the top. Like, who's that going to come from? General manager, head coach? Is ownership going to take a bigger role in it? I don't know, but they got to do something, because, as you said, it's been over a decade, really, other than the one aberration year. It's really been a long time since they've had any kind of sustained success.
Both these teams, the Jets and the Giants, we've talked all throughout the year about the offensive line play and building the offensive line. I think the Giants tried to do, build the ball from the inside out on the defensive side of the ball. They've got some players over there. I thought that front, really controlled the game well. But I think it's just both these teams, Giants in particular, they got to look at the offensive line situation. They're, going to have to bring a quarterback in. They're going to have to keep them upright. These teams in that division are aggressive. They're going to have to go play against Philadelphia, Washington playing better. Micah Parsons. You got to protect that guy. And I think that's one of those things that those franchises look at. Say, all right, what are we doing at the quarterback position? And then how are we going to protect him up front?
I think the bigger issue, too, is, they spent a lot of time on Daniel Jones, but they really never developed Daniel Jones, is whoever they draft, who's going to be the guy that develops them? Who's going to take that guy and really build an offense around? And I think that's just more than hiring an assistant coach. I think that's an organizational decision. When Sean Payton takes Bo Nix, he got a combination of Taysom Hill and Drew Brees all wrapped up in one. Somebody who can run the short yardage 3rd and 1s, but somebody who could throw a rhythm passing game. How are they going to handle the quarterback and how are they going to develop them? I think that's the fundamental question for both these New York franchises. Who is going to be that person? And again, I don't want to make it sound like it's the offensive coach. It's got to be an organizational decision. This is how we're going to play football. We play it in New York. It's cold, it's rainy, it's windy. We've got weather issues, and I think that's something that has to come from the ownership.
Right, and once that's decided, then it's a lot easier to decide what you want in your offensive line, in your receivers, at your running back. Again, there's a similar problem between both organizations. The Giants have already moved on from their quarterback. What are the Jets going to do with Rodgers? They both lost for basically over a decade. There are a lot of problems to address on both sides of the ball. Although both teams have a few pieces to work with, it's as much as those two organizations don't like each other, they're in a very similar situation in the same city.
Yeah, and for the longevity of the team, they do have some good young players. They're going to have to do the right thing with those guys, whether it's Wilson, Johnson, Gardner. Like, what decisions are they going to make? Because you are building for the future here at some point, and, you can't just always start over. So there are some good players on that roster. They got to identify, who they're going to build with going forward, and hopefully that's where they correct it, and they do, and they improve the team that way.
Well, I think both franchises have failed to get a direction from ownership. Who are we? Like, who do you want to become? When you worked at the Giants, it was pretty clear who you were. You were going to be big, physical. You were going to knock the crap out of the 49ers West Coast offense. You were going to take over the game with the offense and run the ball. And we don't have that any longer. They threw 49 passes against the New Orleans Saints in a one-score game with Drew Lock at quarterback. That's not New York Giant football. So we don't know who they are. And then we don't know who the Jets are either, because they have no identity. They continue to change. Are they West Coast? What are they? Robert Saleh's defense? No, they're not. So I think, to me, the owners really have to sit down and give a direction before they hire somebody, because whoever they hire, it's proven they're not going to be successful without it.
And the young players that they have, for example, the Jets with, Hall, Wilson, Gardner, it'll be hard to keep those guys if the losing continues.
Right.
Those are major decisions. And is that the general manager? Is that the head coach? What combination is it? Is it ownership? And what's the real plan going forward? It's not about the name. It's about the vision and the program. The names will find their own way onto the roster or into those positions. It's really the direction of the program and establishing a program that I feel like both organizations have lacked.
And take Denver as the example. Sean knew going into the draft that was his guy. That's who he wanted. Right. He, they were aggressive to go get him, and then developed him. And you can see the benefits for that, having that one vision coming from, Sean Payton, to know exactly what he was looking for. And both of these teams, they could really learn from that. I think that's the direction they got to go.
100%. And Sean's taken a $50 million cap hit along with that rebuilding program. Here's my defense, which has gotten a lot better in Denver. Here's my quarterback. Here's the way we're going to play. They're not there yet, but you can see where this is headed. And I think that makes it a lot easier for everybody. That's what the Giants and Jets need to do.
You can see improvement. And we also can see improvement with the Carolina Panthers. I mean, they entered this season, wondering about whether Bryce Young was going to be good enough. After 2 weeks of the season, they gave up on him. They went to Andy Dalton. Then they got their senses back. And now, I'm not saying Bryce Young is playing great, but at least he gives them some hope for the future as they try to repair this franchise, which was at this darkest hour last year. And I think now, as they enter into the offseason, they've got to get a better supporting cast around them, and they will have some cap room to help that.
Well, this will be the first time under owner David Tepper that the head coach and general manager both head into year two together. And so maybe that'll give them some consistency in the decision-making. Michael, you were in Cleveland when things turned over every year like that. It's really hard to get any kind of a consistent pattern when there's so much change. Everybody's got their own new ideas, and then 6 months or a year later, you flip them.
Yeah, it depends on who the owner's talking to. See, that's the biggest problem, is who he's getting advice from. I know that was the situation in Cleveland. He would never give up an identity of exactly what kind of team do you want. And I think, to me, that's how you measure the success of the organization, when the owner gives you a directive. Philadelphia is pretty clear. Jeffrey Lurie makes it very clear what kind of football team he wants. I think the same thing in Baltimore. I think Pittsburgh has done it since they hired Chuck Noll.
Yes.
You know, back in 1970. They made it very clear who they wanted and how they're going to build it. But I think in Carolina, maybe David Tepper taking a step back has been helpful, but the identity of the team still hasn't been declared because, as you said, Bill, they spent a lot of money on this defense, and it hasn't really improved themselves.
And the improvement on offense that they have had, I think that maybe has settled down some of the questions of, you know, Bryce Young, we can get him to play a certain way. We can put enough pieces around him to give ourselves a competitive, you know, team to put out on the field on Sundays. I like where that's headed, to the point of defensively, overall team roster building. That's the biggest conversation. And again, head coach, general manager sitting down saying, hey, what is this team going to look like? That's the biggest thing they got to do.
Yeah, the hardest thing for any team to do is to figure out what they need to fix, because everybody's got 1,000 opinions of what's wrong with your team, and you got to make the right decisions. And a team that didn't this offseason were the Chicago Bears. You know, the Chicago Bears under Ryan Poles decided we needed more skill. We needed to help a rookie quarterback. Meanwhile, they can't block anybody, and their defensive wasn't as good as they thought it was going into the year. So now Matt Eberflus is out of a job. They're going to search for another head coach. Ryan Poles is going to be there. But there's still some issues here. I mean, last week against San Francisco, the ball really never stopped moving up and down the field. And San Francisco was missing a lot of key pieces to their offense, and the Bears couldn't slow them down. So I think the misevaluation of your team going into the offseason is what hurts the offseason improvement.
Yeah, and when you count on moving an offensive guard out to offensive tackle to take care of a problem that really isn't taking care of a problem, those are examples of how things just go from bad to worse. Again, we talked about the direction of the team at the beginning of the year, and without a good offensive line in Chicago, in that weather, in Green Bay, it's just really hard. It's got to start up front, especially with a young quarterback. I mean, he's just running for his life all day. I don't care who's out there at receiver. There's just no time to throw.
There's been some bright spots with this offense for sure when the quarterback has made those plays. I think they see the future for him within that organization, but I think everything else around him needs to settle down. Starting up front, get the skill guys that he can go out and really grow with as he progresses as a young quarterback. The coaching, you know, get that in place and really try to develop him. I think that'll be the future. But there's just, you know, can't just all be him. There's got to be pieces around him on both sides of the ball that complement each other to give them a chance to win as the season goes on.
Yeah, and who will that be to come in and coach the offense and to, quote, lead Caleb? That'll really be the question they'll have to decide. And whether that's the right person to lead the entire team or whether that's the best person for Caleb, that's another decision that the organization will have to make.
And then we know Eberflus was the type of defensive coach that required specific players for what he wanted to do. And now you're changing to a different scheme. You're probably going to leave that Eberflus scheme and go somewhere else. And some of those players just aren't going to fit.
That's right.
You know, and so now, you know, they were zone team really in concept. Can they go and find out, and they hire a man-to-man defensive coordinator? That could be a little bit of a problem. So there's going to be a changeover in that element too. But at the end of the day, all the money they've spent on wide receivers, Caleb still only averages 6.3 yards per attempt down the field. They're not gaining anything because you can't block anybody. So for the Bears, I think if you're Ryan Poles and you see Detroit being so successful, you got to say to yourself, man, we got to put some money in this group.
We always talk about being honest about the team. And I think Caleb Williams is still a conversation. It's not all the offensive line. It's not all the receivers. He's got to play better too, and he's got to be more efficient. Some of that's coaching, some of that's playing and decision making. Finding the right mix to build around him, but not to make him, you know, a guy who's going to throw 40 or 50 passes every single game. Try to use him more along the lines of a good contributor, not throwing the ball every down, kind of like Harbaugh did in Los Angeles with the Chargers with Herbert. Herbert's had a much better year this year because he hasn't thrown 60 times a game.
Right.
Again, there's an overall vision that really I'd say the Bears need to strike, and it'll be a big challenge for him.
Yeah, and Ryan Poles has given the Bears offense nothing but nickel players basically. So he's encouraged that 40 fast game. I don't know if he realizes Chicago is called the Windy City for a reason, and so they got to play with that.
And the Bears, you look at their division, Detroit, Green Bay, Minnesota. It's similar to what we were talking about with the AFC West. They're looking up at those teams. They've got, they're chasing a little bit here. So the standard isn't just one team in that division. There's really 3 other really good teams in that division that they're going to have to go compete with. So they've got a lot of work to do.
On their schedule, they kind of got off to look like a good start. Some of that was favorable scheduling. Now that's actually caught up to them. I don't know that they've declined as much as just the schedule has leveled out.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge for the Bears. One thing we know, Bear fans will be excited, and hopefully everybody will be excited to come back here on Coach as we go over some of the best games this Sunday. We've got the Bills going to play the Detroit Lions, which will be a fabulous game, and then we got the Battle of Pennsylvania, the Steelers and the Eagles. Welcome back to Coach. We're going to go inside the huddle and preview some of the best games in the final 4 weeks of the NFL season. December football, there's nothing better than it. Let's start with an indoor game. The Buffalo Bills coming off a really tough loss to go face a really good team in the Detroit Lions. I think that's a great game. I know it's interconference, but boy, both these teams, it could be a Super Bowl matchup, Coach.
Well, it really could. Funny you mentioned that, Mike, because when I think back to the Super Bowls when I was with the Giants, we played Denver at the end of the regular season in December in the Meadowlands, and then played them in Super Bowl 21. And then in 1990, we played Buffalo in the Meadowlands in December, and then played them in the Super Bowl in Tampa in Super Bowl 25. And when you learn so much from those games, right, regardless of the outcome, win or lose. When you get to the Super Bowl, when you played that team during the regular season, and it's that interconference game, you learn so much from that game and that experience that you wouldn't normally get. When you play an AFC Championship game, you're pretty familiar with that team, but crossing over. So it's really interesting. If it comes down to that, which it could, no lock, it could be really an interesting game that both teams will look back on. This could be a real key matchup in the big picture, but for this week, really exciting game. 2 teams that can move the ball, it seems like, at will, whenever they want to. And 2 teams defensively that have had issues all year against good offenses.
Great game. I mean, just great game in December, right? And
yeah.
Buffalo, back-to-back road trips. So this will really test them. They went to the West Coast last week. They're going to go home. They're going to go to Detroit. It's not a far trip, but again, you're still going to a hotel. This will be a good test for them to see how they respond, going to another hostile environment inside where it's loud. And, look, this game really will be personnel matchup. I think being able to handle Detroit's offensive personnel groups, how Buffalo's defense does that'll be a big key to this game. So this will be another challenge for that defense to see if they can stop the run.
I usually would think in this game, whatever offense controls time of possession and controls the ball, obviously you got to score points. It's no good to just hold on to the ball and not score. But last week, Buffalo scored 42 points in 21 minutes and 30 seconds, right? Yeah. So how much is that going to help you out? You can hold the ball all you want. Josh Allen's going to score. So I think this is a game where, you guys have played against Buffalo for so long. Buffalo's defense, when you're willing to take the 4- and 5-yard gains, I call it playing like $5 blackjack. They force you, and then when you try to get greedy, they force that negative play. And they set you back, and then they get off the field. And then they build the lead with their offense, whereas I think Detroit won't play into that trap. They're going to model the game plan that I think the Rams used.
And my guess on this is that on 4th down, there aren't going to be too many kicks.
Right.
I think both teams are going to go for it on 4th down if they possibly can, rather than punt the ball or try a long field goal. Points will be at a premium. They're both very aggressive at it. They both have really good offenses. Not sure how good the defenses are. This could be a high-scoring game.
One of the things Detroit does on 3rd down really well is they have that one spy package where they're going to lock up the receivers and they're going to put a safety in charge of the quarterback. So I think they're going to have to do that because you watch the end of last week's game, let Josh Allen just run all over you at the end of the game. You've got to assign someone. Detroit does that in their defensive package on 3rd down. That'll be a big part of stopping them in that situation.
Can he tackle him, though? That's the problem.
It is always the biggest challenge. He's one of the best runners.
The guy gets a long whistle.
Yeah.
He gets a great whistle from the referees because he's impossible to tackle, right? Yeah. And in space, he's like a scat back, but he's 250 pounds. You can't get him on the ground. So, when you go to your blackboard over here, it looks good that we got a spy on him, but it doesn't really work out, does it?
Getting him on the ground is the key. You got to have somebody that can tackle the quarterback, and Allen's a big, strong guy. He's not super fast, but he's very hard to tackle. It'll be interesting to see how this goes and whether or not Detroit can play man-to-man against the Buffalo offense, which I think they'll try to do, but honestly, they've had their trouble with it all year, and so It'd be interesting to see how this goes. It's going to be a great matchup.
Yeah, I think it will be. And then let's go to the Battle of Pennsylvania, right? Pittsburgh, who would have thought they're 10-3? Mike Tomlin's done a great job coaching, and Russell Wilson's resurrected his career. And Philadelphia, for 6 consecutive weeks now, have outgained their opponent on the ground as opposed to throwing the football. I mean, really, the wishbone has come to Philadelphia in some sense, right? They're running the ball like crazy.
Well, the running game's been tremendous, Michael, but they have a really well-balanced offense. You can't forget about Smith and Brown. Of course, Hurts can make plays, and just in general, they're very well-balanced. So certainly Barkley's the key, but that's not all they got.
This would be a battle up front, Philly's offensive line versus Pittsburgh's defensive line. And one of the things Pittsburgh has done a great job of is really with the quarterback runs, whether the design runs to try to limit those or even the scramble plays. They just seem to bottle those guys up and not allow those extra plays or those extended plays to happen. I think Mike Tomlin will have that game plan going in. Battle of Pennsylvania, the Steagles, right? Back in the day, combine these teams. Someone's got to own that name after this game. So it's just going to be a fun one. It'll be exciting to watch these two teams play.
How do you think Tomlin will approach the Eagles? You know, they're one of the best run defenses in football defensively. When they're in their base, they're almost impossible to run the ball. But how do the Eagles get them into their base, or do they play this game out of nickel because they need more speed to tackle Hurts in case he runs?
That'll be interesting to see. I think that'll be a tough matchup. You know, you probably play base defense until they chase you out of it, and then once they chase you out of it, then you go into another defensive back. But you got to do a good job on Barkley, and tackling is as big a part as just the run fits on the defense. Still got to get this guy on the ground.
It'd be the same on the other side of the ball with, Pittsburgh. I think they've found some big plays now. They're getting the ball downfield, and with Philly's defense, they're going to have to do a really good job of making sure that ball doesn't go over their head in some of their split safety coverages that they play, and those guys get run by on the post routes and those seam routes that they, can get hit by in the deep part of the field. That'll be a big part of it.
Nobody better throwing them than Russell Wilson. Guy's got a great touch on the deep ball.
He really lays them in there. He drops them. He's back to the Russell in Seattle throwing that deep ball. I think this game comes down to field goal kickers, right? Elliott struggled to make kicks out of 50 yards, and we know Boswell's been dynamic. Yeah. And so, this is a game where one of these teams is going to control the pace of the game, and that's with Pittsburgh. I think Arthur Smith has done a tremendous job of running the offense in Pittsburgh, playing complementary football to this. And if you're going to beat Philly, you're going to need to do that.
Yes, and the key, for both teams has really been when they haven't turned the ball over, they've been very efficient offensively. And when they have, which hurt the Eagles early in the year, and, when Pittsburgh had a couple of their higher turnover games, not they've had many, that's been a problem. So ball security is going to be very important in this game. And I think, as you said, every point's going to be important. Every field goal, every 4-point play in the red area, those are going to be really important points because this should be a close game.
Two outside teams. Hopefully we get some weather. That'd be fun to see. Like we mentioned with Detroit and Buffalo, this could be another Super Bowl preview for us. Two really good teams that are kind of playing their best football right now in December.
Yeah, and as we move across the country, let's talk about the Chargers coming off a couple tough losses. They lose to Baltimore, and, last week they had a tough game. They lose a very close game to Kansas City. But now they got to play the Bucs, who need to keep winning to stay ahead of the Falcons. And so even though the Chargers, they take these trips, they find ways to win, they're still competitive. They're right there in the game. And Justin Herbert, even without losing Ladd McConkey last week, was still able to make some plays in the second half.
Yeah, the Bucs front's tough, and that'll be a tough matchup for the Chargers' running game and offensive line. We'll see how it goes. Looks like Tampa's starting to get a few guys back now. They had a little lull there in the middle of the season, but starting to get some guys back, playing with a little more confidence. And when Mayfield gets hot, he can be tough.
It'll be another, long travel game here for Tampa going to L.A. Tampa's just, they win ugly. It's not real pretty, but they go out and they're finding a way to win. And, the Chargers, same thing. They've got a tough unit. They play, complementary football. I just see this being just one of those really grinded out games all the way to the end. Who's a little bit tougher maybe in the fourth quarter. Conditioning maybe play into a factor here a little bit. This will be a fun matchup. I think this will be more just a slug-it-out type of game.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it's going to come down to Justin Herbert, who makes the plays, Baker Mayfield, who makes the plays, Mike Evans and the receivers and all that. But I know this about the Chargers. The hardest thing to do is run the ball. Bucky Irvin's been fabulous for Tampa running the ball, and I think it's going to be hard to run the ball, especially in the goal line. I mean, the Chargers are the best red zone defensive team against the run, and when that happens, it's hard to score points.
The Chargers don't do a lot down there. They're not a heavy blitz team. They play a lot of quarters, mix in a little bit of cover two. They just make you earn every yard.
Right.
And there's no freebies and a lot of single coverage and things like that. You got to block them, and and you usually got to throw into more than one guy. And so they've been very successful with that.
Yeah, let's talk about the Packers and the Seahawks out in Seattle for Sunday night. Now, we know there'll probably be rain. There'll be some kind of weather at Seattle, right? It's December. It's going to be some kind of bad weather. The Packers coming off the 10-day rest that they've had from playing the Lions on Thursday night. They go out there. They should be healthy with all that rest. And Seattle, since the bye week, have played really well. I think Mike Macdonald has corrected the defensive issues, especially defending the run. He swapped out all the linebackers, kind of changed his defensive personnel, and now they're starting to play the best that they've played all year.
Yeah, and this is a good time to be playing well, is after Thanksgiving. So if you get your team playing well now through December, and it's a tight battle out there in the NFC West. But whichever team can get themselves playing well, and the Rams look like they're coming on a little bit too. That's good indication on how it's going to go.
Yeah, Mike Macdonald, coming from Baltimore, obviously wants a tough defense, but he has a tough offense now. They're running the ball, regardless of the running back that's been in the game. They've hit some explosive plays, and when they can control the game that way, limit the Packers from getting on the field offensively, that's going to slow that offense down for Green Bay. It's really going to give Seattle that edge. Maybe there's a little weather right there. We saw Green Bay kind of handle the wet weather not well early in the year, so it'd be interesting to see if that does come up again, how they do, because the ball and the turnover situation, that'll be huge in this game. So that'll be a fun one out in the Northwest.
And they haven't played well in Seattle. We all hear about the Legion of Doom and how hard it is to play there, but they haven't really played well out there this year, but they haven't played this kind of football. I think last week when we watched them play in Arizona, where most people felt like Arizona was going to be able to beat them the second time, they really played outstanding defense. They put pressure on Murray. But I was impressed with their offense, especially, as you said, Matt, their run game. And I think Geno's done a really good job of protecting the football.
Yeah, he has, and he's really distributing it. It's not just always going to one guy. I think they're making you defend the entire field, and that defensively is always the hardest thing when you can't just take away one guy or one area of the field. When that ball's going all over the place, they can put you on the heels.
Well, that does it for Week 15 episode of Coach. Please come back and join us next week when we review Week 15 and look ahead to Week 16. For the coaches, Matt Patricia and Coach Belichick, I'm Michael Lombardi. Please make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.